First of all, I will speak in Bulgarian a little bit to represent you, and after that I will be in English. Здравейте, в днешния епизод на История от прехода. Мой гост е господин Уорън Коутс, един от идеолозите на въвеждането на в България и изключителен финансист, човек, който е помогнал много на държавата да излезе от кризата, в която е била през началото на 1997 година. Mr. Coutts, thank you very much for that you appreciate my invitation for this interview.
It's my pleasure.
So we can proceed with the first question. When did you visit Bulgaria for the very first time, and what were your first impressions, both personal and professional?
It was early 1992. I think it was February, very early. And it was actually the first communist country that I had visited. So it was particularly interesting for me. And it was very early on, of course, in Bulgaria's transformation. And it had not proceeded very far. My impressions, I stayed in the Sheraton. Everybody stays in the Sheraton. It's just almost next door to the National Bank. But across the street was a large shopping complex. I don't know whether it's still there, a department store or something. But we looked with great interest, and most of the shelves were empty, and a few of the shelves that had goods would have hundreds of the same good, most of them useless. Maybe 100 teddy bears or some such thing. So it was very, very sad. It was also a period when inflation picked up a great deal, not as bad as later in 97 or so, but it was maybe a 200% inflation rate, something on that order. And it was my first encounter of dealing with a currency with such a high rate of inflation. And I saw for the first time currency counting machines in the Sheraton Hotel. To pay a bill, you needed a stack of currency notes, and they had a machine for counting them. I'd never seen any such thing again. So those were the two impressions that stick in my mind after all these many years.
What was the purpose of your visit in the first time? When you say to me it was something like 1992, something like 2 years after the transition period. But what was the purpose of your visit?
To establish contact with the National Bank. I was there representing the International Monetary Fund, and they were requesting technical assistance from us. So we were beginning that process and meeting our counterparts at the National Bank. Governor Tudor Volchev was governor at the time, very nice man. So it was sort of a get acquainted visit.
Who invited you to this visit? The Bulgarian government or the National Bank representative?
That's hard for me to say because the request comes to the staff of the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, from the executive director representing Bulgaria. He is representing Bulgaria. Now you tell me whether that's the National Bank or the Finance Ministry or whoever, but he is Bulgaria's official representative, political representative at the IMF, and they transmit their technical assistance requests through him.
What do you remember from this your visit? Not so many people were there from the United States, but I mean, like you're not so personal, like your professional point of view. What was your impressions of your communication with the Bulgarian representatives?
Very positive. First of all, this was my first experience leading an IMF team. So I was learning my job as well as I was establishing relationships with Bulgarians. Let me add one other thing that I was very, very impressed with on that first visit and on subsequent visits, which was the number of newspapers. And whether it was this first visit in 92 or somewhat later, I can't remember for sure now, but there were also a very large number of English language newspapers. And of them, more than one, quite a few, it seemed, business English language newspapers. I was both amused and very positively impressed with how enthusiastically Bulgarians wanted to discuss everything. And I guess all of these various newspapers helped convey various points of view. I met some very nice young Bulgarian reporters who became friends and subsequently epitomizing the entrepreneurial spirit of many Bulgarians, went on to become quite successful, I think, in the publishing business. They were young reporters with, I think it was called 24 or 24 hours or just 24 perhaps. They created Capital Press later on. This is Ivo Prokofiev and Philip Hermaniev. I apologize for my poor pronunciation of Bulgarian, but
I think we understood each other. But okay. Now this is the point. It's good that you mentioned the newspaper, because today we had some problems with this because our country is, how to say it, not so free from this point of view. Like when you want to become a journalist, it's very difficult because we had an oligarchy here. I don't know, how was there from your point of view, from your first impressions? You couldn't understand the Cyrillic alphabet, of course, the Bulgarian language, but what you heard from the journalists that you have seen in Bulgaria, what was Bulgaria in these years?
They were very, very eager, as were the other former Soviet republics I was subsequently visiting, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Moldova, and so on. They were extremely eager to learn about the West, as they put it. They wanted to know how things were done, how economies worked, how politics worked in the rest of the world, because they wanted to become part of it.
So we say that your first visit to Bulgaria was in the 1992, but why Bulgaria didn't implement the currency board in this year? So we had to wait something like 5 years after that. Why we didn't implement this currency board?
I don't have an answer to the question, so let me speculate. It was not at the top of the questions or issues that were put to us at that time. Though inflation was quite high then, but it came down rather quickly as the central bank undertook a more normal or traditional monetary policy. So you had several years, 3 or 4 or 5 years, in which monetary policy was not bad. And while the central bank was attempting to develop, its bigger problem was in banking supervision, and a weak / corrupt banking system that needed a lot of attention. Excuse me. Sorry, I'm going to ignore that. So we were focused more on developing the institutional capacity, reforming the departments of the National Bank to perform the functions that would be more appropriate for a market economy central bank and banking supervision, and less focused on monetary policy itself, because through most of those intervening years in the mid-90s, it was not creating a problem. It was sort of okay. But of course, that blew up, as you all know, in 96 and 7. And then the question became, what should Bulgaria do about it. And I must thank Kurt Schuler and Steve Hanke for laying the intellectual foundation to our understanding of how a currency board in a modern market economy setting would work and how it would contribute to monetary stability. The most important thing, which I think every Bulgarian understands perfectly well these days, the most important thing that a central bank has to contribute in terms of the currency. I'm not talking about its other functions like banking supervision and foreign exchange reserve management and all those things, payment services and so on, but in preserving, in issuing and providing a currency that has a stable value, the most important contribution it has to make to its economy is preserving the stability of that currency. And there is no system that does so as well as a currency board. The currency board rules, as I like to refer to it.
Actually, I spoke with another American financist, Mr. Richard Rand, who said that this was his point of view earlier than you even, but the people in Bulgaria, the politics rejected everything. Actually, the representatives of Bulgarian National Bank in these days also rejected. How did they change their mind? Because the inflation or something is different in 6 years.
I'm sure what changed their mind was the horrible inflation of 96 and 7. They knew that they had completely lost control of the money supply and that a dramatic change was needed. We urged them from the International Monetary Fund to consider the merits and virtues of a currency board. Ultimately, they were convinced, and now you have one.
So, what is the reason of currency co-ops from your point of view in Bulgaria in this period of time? Why we had to make this, let me say it like this, co-ops, because actually it was co-ops. People suffered a lot in this period.
I'm not understanding one of the words you're using that sounds like co-op.
Co-ops, it means that we crashed. The country crashed in this year. Why we crashed like this? Because you said something like $1 is 7,000 level.
Right.
The salaries were very small in the period.
Well, with apology, I have not reviewed the details of what led to that high rate of inflation. But a high rate of inflation is always caused by creating too much money, an excessive money supply. Virtually always that is a result of pressure from the government, from the finance ministry, to finance what the government is spending. When the government doesn't have sufficient revenue of its own, the central bank prints money, creates money to finance the government, and that leads to inflation. Most central banks are careful enough that when that process gets underway, they pull back and refuse the finance ministry's urging to continue buying government debt, to continue financing the government. They resist it. Modern central bank laws make that much easier and almost mandatory because central banks enjoy a high degree of autonomy from this kind of pressure. But that was not the case in the world in the 90s when Bulgaria was having this trouble. So, though as I said, I haven't gone back and actually reviewed the specific details of how this built up, I'm sure that it's the same story as encountered everywhere else that has a similar experience. The government leaned on the central bank to finance increasing government spending that increased the money supply beyond what the economy could accommodate at stable prices, so prices began to rise. And as prices rise, It's a vicious cycle. The central bank has to print money even faster because it's losing value to keep up with what the government is trying to spend until it explodes. And at the point of explosion, different central banks go in different directions. Some countries dollarize, which could be with the euro, for example. I mean, they simply stop using. I was also very involved in Zimbabwe's hyperinflation, where they literally dollarized. People simply threw away the Zimbabwean currency because it really was not worth the paper it was printed on. And since they couldn't pay the German printer in hard currency to keep printing, the German printer refused to print anymore, and it all ended. Well, okay, that's a quick story of how hyperinflation.
It's very interesting because I spoke with 1 week ago with the economic minister of this period in Bulgaria. He said that two things that are opposite of your point of view. First, that the government blamed the banks for the failures because most of them were private banks. And the second thing that actually there was some kind of requirements for the introduction of currency board, and the bankruptcy was one of these requirements. Is that true? They say that this failure of the lev was something like influence from outside of the country. It means that monetary fund, for example, International Monetary Fund, wanted in this period Bulgarian currency to be from the level of zero, actually.
Is this Ivan Kostov, who was the finance minister I worked with at the time? But the story that you are relaying is totally wrong. The International Monetary Fund did not recommend a currency board or anything else until Bulgaria came to the IMF with an inflation rate that was already 1,000% or more, and asked, what can we do? So it was totally internal. Now, it may well have been that problems with some banks, there were problems with some banks. There was an enormous, and sadly probably still is, of corruption within the Bulgarian economy. Most of the Bulgarian banks were not private. They were state-owned. State-owned banks are notoriously sources of corruption because they don't suffer the same bottom line that a private bank does. Soft corruption is just to hire your cousin or other relatives who don't particularly have the skills necessary to do what they do. And corruption from there becomes even nastier, of making loans that are not solid, not sound, can't be repaid to friends and people can't repay. So the banking sector then was predominantly state-owned, not private. The inflation problem was totally internal, totally a result of the central bank, of the national bank, printing too much money. Some of it might have been to bail out failing banks, that may be, but much of it was to finance the government's excessive spending.
Also, something that is very interesting. Many people have become rich from the bankruptcy in Bulgaria. They took out loans in Bulgarian level, convert them into dollars, and after that, when the Bulgarian currency depreciated, they already had the savings. This was beginning of we call in Bulgaria credit millionaires. Now they are oligarchs in Bulgaria. So what do you think? It was some kind of influence from outside, for example, USA or Russia, or not?
No. What you're describing is one of the costs of high inflation. We're not talking about 2, 3, 4, 5, even 6 or 7% inflation. We're talking about hundreds or even thousands of % of inflation. Such inflations are extremely damaging to an economy. And one of the many ways in which they damage the economy is that some people, the oligarchs you're talking about, are able to protect themselves against that inflation better than the average person. They protect themselves, you described it. In part, one of the ways they protect themselves is to convert the lev when its value is still relatively decent into dollars. And while the value of the remaining lev vanished through hyperinflation, they're holding dollars. So they benefit, but that doesn't benefit the economy. That hurts the economy, but it's just one of the many ways in which high inflation hurts an economy. But you can't blame those who are in a position to protect themselves from being robbed by inflation from doing so. Most people can't. Most people are not in a position to protect themselves. So it's unfair in that regard. But it's still understandable that anyone who can do so will protect the value of their wealth.
What are your memories from the discussion about the preparation of the implement of the currency board in Bulgaria? Where were the differences between your views and the Bulgarian experts? Because 7 years ago, they didn't want to implement dollar, euro, another currency. And now they say that maybe it was good that we didn't implement. Mr. Stoyanov, the president of Bulgaria, say that he was against the dollar, he was for a German mark. What did you remember from this period?
Well, first of all, at the height of the hyperinflation period, when Bulgaria was considering what they should do, while we at the IMF were urging them to consider a currency board, we always talked in terms of what was then the German mark, because that's where they are. They're in Europe, sort of, more or less. That would be a more important trading partner than the United States. So it made economic sense to anchor the Bulgarian lev to the euro, now the euro, then the German mark, rather than the dollar. So that was always our view, that the German mark would be the sensible anchor. But in recommending a currency board, it was important for us that it be Bulgaria's decision. And therefore, we insisted that Bulgaria consult with its public. I don't remember the details of whether there was a referendum but there was some kind of public discussion in Bulgaria in order to gain support. And when Bulgaria came back and said, yes, we want to go forward with the currency board, we were glad, because we thought that would be the most sensible way of ending the inflation very quickly, which it did, and providing Bulgaria with a stable currency thereafter. And my sense is it's been a spectacular success.
What I want to ask you is a little bit, how to say, tricky, but we should discuss it. 1 year ago, Mr. Heinke said that he has some evidences of corruption in Bulgaria during the period of Mr. Iván Kostov, like Prime Minister, and Mr. Stoyanov, like President. He was advisor to Mr. Stoyanov. Did you know something about this? Because Mr. Stoyanov and Mr. Stoyanov say that Mr. Kostov knows better than him. Mr. Kostov said that Mr. Heinke is a little bit jealous because he said to him that he is not the father of currency board. I don't know what it means, the father of the currency board in Bulgaria. But let me a little bit explain you the situation. And Bulgarian people want to know how was in this period. There was corruption or not? And who is the father of the currency board in Bulgaria, actually?
I don't know who the father of the currency board is. Steve Heinke thinks he is. He's certainly an intellectual, provided the intellectual foundation, so he deserves a lot of credit for that. So who in Bulgaria, you know, there's a saying, I can't remember it exactly, but something to the effect that failures are orphans and successes have 100 fathers, or something to that effect. So first of all, I know nothing particular or specific about who might have been corrupt and who wasn't, and what forms it took. I was aware in the dealings that we had, which were quite arm's length with some of the failing banks, that the banks had clearly failed because of corruption. So we were aware that there was corruption before we arrived, while we were there, and after we left, if we've actually ever left. Bulgaria suffers a great deal from a lack of clear, honest, reliable rule of law. And this hurts everybody in the country except those scoundrels who benefit by being corrupt. So we only knew that there was a lot of corruption.
Did you observe the situation after that, after your visit? What happened in the Bulgaria during this period of time to the European Union? Because after that is already understandable that we are in good position.
Well, I only, from my first visit in '92, I was very engaged with Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and Moldova until I came back during the hyperinflation and helped with establishing the currency board. So I have not been all that involved in the details of what was going on. More recently, and perhaps this addresses what you're interested in. More recently, I've had some very interesting discussions with Todor Tanov, who was a visiting scholar at Johns Hopkins this last year here, where I met him. He's back in Bulgaria. I liked him very much, and we had considerable discussions about the currency board and Bulgaria's potential joining the Eurozone. Should Bulgaria give up the lev and adopt the euro?
That was my next question, actually.
All right.
So I want to know your point of view also.
All right. And I've written an article I can send you a copy of on the subject. And Steve Hanke and I have somewhat different views on this. The difference in our views, however, is tiny in the sense that he and I both are very solidly and firmly committed to the virtue of retaining currency board rules for the central bank. I have a different angle on it than he does, but we're standing on the same foundation. So our differences are minor, I would say almost semantic. First of all, the lev is fixed to the euro. So its supply is determined by market demand at that fixed price for the euro. Economically, there's no significant difference between that arrangement, a currency board that issues its domestic currency in response to market demand, and being a part of a broader currency system, of being a part of the euro, because it would work exactly the same way. You would be issuing, the central bank that would be issuing euro to Bulgarian customers that they would pay for with foreign exchange in response to their demand, just as they do now with the lev. So my view is, since the euro is already the foundation, the euro already anchors the value of the lev, adopting the euro directly loses none of that market control, with a caveat that I'll get to in a moment, but it gains the benefit of a common currency throughout the Eurozone area, which makes Bulgarians doing business and traveling throughout Europe easier and a little bit less costly because you don't have to convert your currency into the euro. But in terms of monetary policy, it's identical. As long as whatever law Bulgaria would adopt in joining the euro would retain the same currency board rules. It would retain the same prohibition against financing the government, of supplying currency to the government that the government isn't paying for with hard currency. So in short, it is possible for Bulgaria to retain, and they should retain, full currency board rules while substituting the lev for the euro and joining the euro area. So for those reasons, I support joining the euro area, joining the eurozone.
Are there some kind of, how to say it, arguments against the eurozone? Because people here are worried only about their salaries, actually. They don't think that is good or bad. They just are worried about the salaries. How we reflect to the salaries of the people this?
Given
there are
the
examples like Greece, for example, because Mr. Ran said Greece, Italy, he's the opposite point of view. He said that it's not good for Bulgaria to be part of this Eurozone because the Eurozone will be stable enough only for the German people. But here are also there people in Bulgaria who think like this. Maybe we will become not richer, maybe we become a little bit, you know, the opposite because of the Eurozone. I don't know.
The lev is already fixed to the euro. So the value of the lev is fixed to the value of the euro. So whether you're talking about a lev or a euro, the impact on your wages, your lev or euro wages, are identical. You know, they're virtually the same thing with a different name. So there's no implication there. There's no implication for inflation. But the case of Greece and Italy is a good illustration that while a sound currency is a very important part of the foundation of an efficient and successful economy, it's not the only thing that matters. Fiscal prudence matters. A government that lives within its means matters. There are many other things that matter. So a sound currency is important, but it's not everything. And Greece and Italy have demonstrated that. But, you know, so Bulgaria, even with the currency board it now has, or adopting the euro directly rather than indirectly. They've adopted it indirectly now with the currency board. But either way, it is still important for the Bulgarian government to manage its expenditures and revenue prudently, or it will have Greece's problems.
Because of the COVID, this changed a little bit. Because they had to make some tough decisions, like taking a loan or something like this, because there was, let me say like this, last 5 years were good for Bulgaria. We didn't have some deficit. But because of the COVID, things changed. What is your point of view about the COVID and how the government should deal with this?
How many hours do we have to discuss this?
It should be shorter.
Good. It's obviously very complicated. A starting point, I think, in thinking about it is that especially those governments that required companies and businesses to shut down in order, for health reasons, to protect their workers and so on, have in a way confiscated the property temporarily of those businesses. And in a normal rule of law economy or country, if the government confiscates your property, they must compensate you. They must pay you for it. So one can argue that there's a moral obligation of the government to compensate those businesses that they forced to shut down. Now, in many cases, businesses shut down not because the government forced them, but because individual citizens, to protect their health, refused to visit them anymore. But the economic consequences are the same. So it's an extremely difficult situation where I think it is justified for governments to provide temporary, and it's essential that it be temporary, financial assistance to those who lost income because of lost production. You have to keep in mind that we're talking about a situation in which total output is reduced. Income in the economy is reduced. So any help, because businesses are shut down, and any help the government gives is not creating new output. What it's doing is redistributing a reduced output in order to make the burden of that shock more evenly felt throughout the economy. So it's a redistribution scheme. It's very justified, in my view, to provide that temporary assistance. But it's full of challenges, full of difficulties. For example, if the government is temporarily subsidizing one way or another, forgiving the debts of, or however they are doing it, a particular business, there is the risk that they're keeping a business alive that doesn't deserve economically to stay alive, a business that should be going out of business. This is a part of a dynamic market economy that new businesses come along, do a better job, new products, and old ones go out of existence. If the government's programs preserve the life of zombie companies, that's bad for the economy when it recovers, because it recovers with a zombie that's not, really producing anything of value to the economy. So, since you said I didn't have 3 hours to answer this, the short answer is I support governments providing temporary assistance to share the burden, soften the burden of the drop in output, but it's a dangerous thing to do. It needs to be done, but it's dangerous, needs to be done carefully so that it's temporary and only goes to those who need it and doesn't keep zombie companies alive. Hard to do. Personally, I think the best approach is to giving assistance to individuals, not to companies.
But the individual should be the manager of the company or just one employee. Because, in Bulgaria, you have been here. Here is a little bit strange situation. You had some business owner who has problems, but has the last car on the market. And there is some employee who is really need to provide himself goods. So who has to be, how to say it, substitute for the government should give money to the employee or to the owner of the business, if it's individual, not the company?
My preferred approach is a guaranteed minimum income. What that means is that every single person in the economy, whether they're unemployed, a middle manager, or the owner of the company, it doesn't matter. Every single individual would get the same amount of money as a guaranteed minimum income. Then wealthier people are wealthier people. They will remain wealthier people. But by providing the same minimum income to everyone, you're not opening the door to providing preferential treatment to one and not the other. Everybody is getting exactly identical treatment. There are no magic bullets, you know. I mean, this is a difficult situation, difficult decisions to make, but that would be the approach I would take.
Also, I want to ask you, some sectors maybe will disappear, like tourism, if it's still too long this period. We suffered this year because, you know, we have been in Bulgaria, we have very nice summer coast, very nice winter coast, but we don't have tourists. I don't know, it's the same, I think, in USA. So if we have, unfortunately, maybe we will have another year like this, it will be a catastrophe for the tourism in Bulgaria. What is your receipt for this to overpass the situation?
Well, I am always an optimistic person, and therefore the only, well, there are two developments that will allow economies to return to normal or something close to normal. The normal may not be the normal it was last year. I mean, people may continue working more from home forever in the future than they did in the past. There'll be a lot of things that will never be the same as they were before. But for economies to, quote, normalize, people need to feel safe, health-wise, in resuming their activity. That comes from two sources. One, herd immunity, getting the virus. Most people who get it don't even know they have it, or have very, very mild symptoms. A small percent die. So it's a serious virus, but the vast majority of people receiving it don't have serious consequences. Few do. So I'm not saying that it's not a very serious virus. It definitely is. But the expectation and hope is that when you're exposed to the virus, your body develops immunities and you won't get it again. Unfortunately, the virus is evolving, so there's more than one strain of the virus, so we're not quite sure how that will impact immunity. The other is a vaccine. So through one or the other of those methods, people will sometime in the next year, I'm confident, regain confidence that they are sufficiently protected from this virus that they will go back to work. They will go back to their restaurant. They will go back to their normal activities, and the economy will revive. But it won't revive in exactly the same form it was in before, and you don't want to prevent that. You want the economy always to be able to flexibly adjust to conditions and consumer demand.
What would be your advice? This is the final question about the Bulgarian people in the future. How they have to overpass just a regular Bulgarian person, for example, which has salary like 1,000 leva, which is the average salary in Bulgaria, who has not enough money, not so much savings, but still has money to live, as it was 20 years ago.
And what is your question about that person?
What is your advice to these people? Because here the situation now is a little bit different than the other European countries. Fortunately, we don't have quarantine. Unfortunately, there is a virus. So people are a little bit not so stressful, which is something good, but it's still there a virus. We expect every time to be under quarantine. So what is your advice for the people who don't have enough savings, unfortunately, but want to know how to overpass the quarantines, future quarantines, and maybe some bankruptcy of the companies?
Well, this is why the financial help from the government, redistributing from those who can afford to give up more to those who are not so able to get by without their normal income. This is why that help is so important in this temporary interim period until there is a vaccine, until there is health assurance and confidence that you can go back to work. So in the longer run, our financial well-being comes from working, from earning a living, and that should recover and return with the widespread use of a vaccine and herd immunity. There's it's not a pretty picture. So I can't say that there's a magic wand that's going to make everything well. But these developments will enable, hopefully within 6-12 months, for the economies all around the world to return to something that we might recognize as closer to normal.
Thank you very much for this interview. I hope it was my pleasure. I hope you also enjoyed.
Corruption, and that the more you are able to address corruption, to wring it out of the system, it's a long, slow process. That will do more than anything to raise the standard of living in Bulgaria.
Corruption is something that now they are protesting in Bulgaria against the corruption, but corruption is only in the laws or where or elsewhere, the corruption?
I have not been involved with the Bulgarian economy directly for a long time, so I can't give a more specific answer. But the rule of law is not what it needs to be. The reliability of your property right and contract enforcement and so on, that would include loans that are misdirected for special favors and so on. But the rule of law is not as solid and predictable as it should be for the economy to flourish.
In fact, actually, this is the reason that a lot of businesses are outside of the country, actually.
Yes, yes.
So it didn't change from what. Let me ask you one last question, because this is actual topic now in Bulgaria. What was your first when you visited the Bulgaria for the first time, and after that, what was your first crush with this corruption? When you have seen it for the very first time in Bulgaria, in business or in the bank system, where?
Of course, I never encountered it in a business sense. I never encountered it directly. So it was always indirectly from what people told me. People that I met who suffered because they were cheated and robbed by a court ruling that was clearly bribed and and unfair. And the closest was in my working with some of the banks that had failed, in helping the National Bank develop and build up its bank resolution capabilities, its banking supervision capabilities. And it was obvious that in the banks that we looked at, that corruption had played a significant role. There were some small private banks that were totally corrupt, but the biggest losses were from the state banks, spread more thinly, but over a much bigger pie, so to speak, where resources of the country were wasted.
The bank has said this also, but the people here, they didn't know if it's true or just blaming 20 years ago, because when the president Stoyanov said this is not true, when the prime minister said this is not true, people think maybe Mr. Hanke has some interest here in Bulgaria. Now you say the same. Mitchell Ritzterman has said the same in interview with me. So maybe we have to think a little bit how to overpass. Do you have some, some suggestions how we can overpass this? Changing the law system or something different? Or it's not this the problem?
also a difficult challenge. Let me give you a double answer. A small little example of corruption from a Bulgarian friend who has lost the parenthood of his child because of a court ruling that, as he tells it, and I 100% believe him, was totally corrupt. His divorced wife's father bribed the judge to keep this boy away from his father. That's corruption. That's a different kind of corruption, but it's a lack of rule of law. And so this seems to him, according to him, common in the courts of Bulgaria, that judges can be bought, can be bribed to not be fair judges. What do you do? Well, I'm sorry that you tell me that the press is less free.
It's less free, yes. European Parliament has said this, not me. Of course, I the same point of view, but European Parliament said that in Bulgaria there is a very big problem with the freedom of the press and the freedom of the people who want to work there.
A free press is an extremely important, useful tool in fighting corruption. The fight against corruption it's like fighting a cancer. It's a long, slow, hard process of drying it up. You dry it up by exposing it to light. So whenever corruption is encountered, those who are in a position to expose it raise the cost of corruption and therefore reduce the incentive to corruption, reduce the payoff to corruption. And I don't know any other way than a public that is tired of it and wants to bring it to an end, doing all they can bit by bit to expose it wherever they encounter it. I'm so sorry what you say about the press, because they're an important part of that process.
One of the biggest problems in Bulgaria.
Yeah.
So because the press is under control of the oligarchy, part of it becomes because of the crush of the Bulgarian leva 25 years ago. Thank you very much for this interview. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome.